wild card. The other big story that you've been all over this week is a bit of Winston Reid. Apparently, him and West Ham have parted ways, and it's been a bit of a whirlwind tracking Winston Reid because he was kind of that first. There was an era. I don't know if you can call a couple of years an era, but there was a period where it was kind of Winston Reid and Tommy Smith, not Tommy Smith with a Y, just Tommy Smith, regular Smith. They were kind of the big Kiwi footballers doing their thing around the world, which back then was pretty much England. And they were like, these are the two dudes. Like, and then Winston Reid was like, holy shit, who is this guy? He's Danish. Like, what the fuck's he doing playing for New Zealand? But he's like, Moldy Danish, and he's here and he wants to play for New Zealand. Popped out of nowhere. Like, let's be honest, he was age group player for Denmark, so no one really had him on their radar. Pops out, and then suddenly, we've got a really good defender. I think that he started like right back for the All Whites. Was at the World Cup, and he was like right back.
No, him and Tommy Smith both became eligible for that World Cup, didn't they? Like in between qualifying for the World Cup and playing at the World Cup. So their first games would have been in warm-ups prior to it. I don't think he played right back because Leo Bertos was right back, wasn't he there? But I think they might have. I
think it might be Smith.
11.
Smith played a bit of right back because we had like Ryan Nelson, like the centre back was all good.
Yeah, I think they played a back three, is what I was going to say. So I think Smith might have been left centre back, Winston Reid right centre back, and Ryan Nelson in the middle, and then Visilic, Ivan Visilic as a holding midfielder paired with Simon Elliott doing a bit more of the roving stuff.
Is there? Can you call it like, because you said holding midfielder, like for someone like Visilic, is there an in between where it's like instead of being a holding midfielder, so you're a midfielder holding back, could you be like a center defender who's up? Like, does that exist in football, or is it just holding?
I think that position would always be classed as a holding midfielder, but you're not wrong in that they're kind of those two. It's like, is the glass half full or half empty? It's like it's both, isn't it? If it's half full and half empty, it's both of the same. It's both at the same time. It's sort of the same thing there. Are you attacking defender or a defending attacker?
Because I'm thinking like eager centre back. What position do you play? I'm an eager centre back.
They had a name for that because I think Franz Beckenbauer back in the day used to be like the playmaking sweeper type thing, like pinging passes from the back. Even you might even say like Andrea Pirlo was sort of like the development of that, like sit back, but with your passing range, you're still an attacker in a way. With football positions and formations, the thing to remember is that they're all super fluid. So like there's really not much difference between a 4-3-3 and a 4-2-3-1 sometimes. Like if your wingers push up or your striker drops in, it's the same as having a flat 3 versus 1, and then it's all kind of it all blends together. It's not those things are a guideline rather than a rule.
Shout out to Pirlo. He gets a lot of airtime on the niche cast for some reason. Like,
he's always a classic player.
Always front of mind. So Winston Reid, part of that, like, wow, we just went down memory lane with that World Cup. Probably one of the sneaky greatest moments of New Zealand sport, but we'll let that nostalgia linger and loiter in the air for the time being. But that was like
Winston Reid scored that header against Slovakia, whichever it was,
and that was our introduction to Winston Reid. And then from there, he would have got the West Ham signing straight after, because that's what happens. Like major tournament gets signed by a club, and then he goes West Ham, and now we've got the end of the West Ham section of his career, which is pretty much his whole career, because he hasn't been at West Ham for a while. So now, like things like he was kind of the peak of the Premier League powers, because he would have taken over from Ryan Nelson as our centre back. Poster boy Kiwi centre back doing his thing in the world, and then
often injured, heroic leader.
And then, just as his West Ham stuff started to decline, was when our golden generation that we're seeing across all sports, pretty much. And shout out, because we've got the All Whites haven't played in how many days?
I can't remember what it got up to, like 692 by the time they actually play in a couple of weeks, I think.
And
something
so,
like
and
that.
we found out the Kiwis haven't played same period. And I just checked the Tall Ferns when they go to the Asia Women's World Cup. They are playing their first game since November 2019 as well. So it's all that was
All three of them have last played in the same
last period of like New Zealand national teams. But yeah, so his West Ham career started to decline, and it kind of put him off into different pockets of football oblivion. But that coincided with the rise of Kiwi football and your Flying Kiwis group expanding, and it kind of overtook Winston Reid as the lead story most times. But Winston Reid's still there as like the pillar, as the Komatua, as the OG, doing his thing. So how do you just reflect on, especially that period, because I think that's the messiest period that you can offer clarity to, is the end of his West Ham stuff. How do you take in what has happened at the end of his West Ham days and his journey around the footballing world, and how that might shape where he goes now and some of that future forecasting stuff with Winston Reid?
Yeah, there's you sort of sparked an idea in my head as well with some of what you're saying there about how like so I think New Zealand has only had 6 Premier League players ever, like 6 since the start of the Premier League era, which is like 92 or something. We've had 6 players who have played in that competition. A couple of them only played, like Lee Norfolk played about 4 games in like 96 or something. Danny Hay got like a couple of games for Leeds off the bench back in the day. Simon Elliott snuck in there briefly, but only because of injuries, only played about a dozen times for Fulham. But despite that, and despite the fact that there's only been those 6 guys overall, it's been like nearly 20 years. I don't know when Ryan Nelson first played. It would have been 2002, 2003, something like that. I would guess off the top of my head. But basically, ever since then, there's always been at least one New Zealander starting whenever they're fit in the Premier League. Like there hasn't been very many overall, but there's always been there's been no gap since then. Because I was looking up to see, well, actually, no, Spark Sport tweeted a clip of the time, sort of in honor of Winston Reid's Premier League time, the clip of the time him and Chris Wood went up against each other. And there was like an incident where I think West Ham got reduced to 10 men at some point, and Burnley were just dominating, chasing an equaliser because West Ham had been 1-0 up. And Chris Wood scored the equaliser. He actually has a good record of scoring goals against West Ham, mostly not against Winston Reid though. He scores like a back post header, a good strong Chris Wood type header, and then goes to grab the ball so they can run it back to halfway and start again. And Winston Reid grabs the ball, and Chris Wood gives him the shove into the net. And then he realizes it's Winston Reid that he shoved, and he's sort of like, he doesn't stop trying to get the ball back off him, but you can tell there's like a level of aggression that goes from here to here. Like he stops when he realizes it's his buddy, and someone who he obviously like knows going back to that World Cup squad, and someone who he's probably looked up to a fair bit while he was in the Championship trying to work his way up. And Winston Reid was established as a Premier League player. But I looked up the Flying Kiwis edition from that time, which is cool that I've now been like, this stuff we've been covering on the website for long enough that we actually have like a historical record there. So I looked up that to see what I had written about that game and sort of shared that. And there was a note within that piece about how this was the 3rd time ever that 2 New Zealanders had gone up against each other. So while we've had this like, and there's been none since, because you know, this was like late October 2017 or something like that. Early 2018, like April or something, 2018 was when Winston Reid had his serious knee injury. So since then, he hasn't played a Premier League game. Chris Wood has continued to carry the torch, but like for while there's been that sort of Ryan Nelson from here to here, and then Winston Reid from here to here, and then like Chris Wood on top of that, there's only been 3 times when one of them played against each other. Like there's been this unbroken line the whole time, but Winston Reid played twice against Ryan Nelson, and it wasn't it wasn't even in the Blackburn days. It was after, because there was a season when they were both there. Winston Reid's first year for West Ham, but he wasn't like established then. So I think there was a game he didn't play. There was another game he was injured for, or maybe Ryan Nelson was injured for it or something like that. Then they got relegated. Winston Reid wins his place at West Ham playing in the Championship, comes back up to the Premier League. But that next year was either Nelson's last or second to last year in the Premier League. And he was at QPR by that point. Like, he'd gone to Spurs, had then moved on to QPR. So they played against each other twice, QPR versus West Ham. Then Nelson retires. Then Winston Reid just carries the torch for ages. Then he gets this one game against Chris Wood, who they did play against the season that Winston Reid was in the Championship. They did. Chris Wood was on loan from, he must have still been at West Brom in those days, but he was on loan at Birmingham. They played each other once that season in the Championship. Then they played each other this one time in the Premier League. Come the second game that season, Reid was injured, I'm pretty sure, by that point. And yeah, there's nothing else on top of that. So there's only been the 3 times that 2 New Zealanders have played against each other, even though there has been those overlapping periods. But yeah, definitely pretty funky that there's been this entire like 18-year spell or whatever it is, unbroken, with a New Zealander playing regularly mostly as a first 11 player for those teams. There have been injuries. All 3 of them have had their injury issues. Not so much anymore for Chris Wood. He's a lot fitter these days. He doesn't break down nearly as much as he did when he was sort of in his earlier 20s. But as to your other point about how things broke down at West Ham, well, that injury is where it started. And it's really, I've written a couple times, including just yesterday, about like the situation with his contract, because, and I probably don't need to break down the entire thing here, but suffice to say, West Ham had given him an unnecessary contract extension. They gave him a 6-year contract extension after Sam Allardyce left, and it was the sort of a point where they were trying to like reestablish the core of the team. And they re-signed him, they re-signed Mark Noble, they re-signed like James Tompkins, I think was another one, all in a short period of time. Reid got a 6-year extension. 2 years later, they gave him another 6-year extension. So a 2-year extension on top of what he already had, presumably with a pretty hefty pay rise. And he played 16 Premier League games on that 6-year contract. So he got injured. He never played again. He came back briefly for like under 23s, some preseason stuff. He struggled to maintain his fitness, had a setback, missed the next season. Like it was rough. He started going out on loan once David Moyes came in, and he was sort of back to fitness, but like just not in the first team plans anymore. He'd missed too much time, and that's how it broke down. But because of that big old contract that he had signed, and because of the high wages he was on, because of the time he signed it at, and his sort of status in the team at that point, very hard to flip that contract. You can't really sell him at that stage because no one wants to spend money on a player that they don't even know if they're fit enough to play. And loans are difficult because how are you going to get them to cover you're still mostly going to be paying the majority of his wages. So they did it in the end, like arrange that with Sporting Kansas City, arrange that with Brentford, but they weren't able to get a loan for him before the deadline day, most recently. And in an ideal world, he'd have gone to the Olympics, he'd have played, like excelled in every game for New Zealand. He'd been, putting himself in the shop window just before the big old, what do they call it? Flying Kiwis transfer season buzz. Like he could have been a part of that. He could have been on that wave, but instead he got injured, played the full game in 1 of their 4 matches for the Ollie Whites and came off injured in 2 others, missed 1 entirely with injury. Not the showcase he was hoping for, and he was still sort of nursing that injury come deadline day. So nothing happened there. But however, into the last 2 years of a contract that West Ham hadn't been able to afford to get out from under beforehand, I guess last 2 years maybe just a little bit more manageable, and they just figured, well, we're going to have to bite the bullet. We're offering him the opportunity to leave. He can sign with somewhere else now that he thinks he's back to close enough to fitness to be able to play fairly regularly for whoever. It's not going to be us, but if we pay him most of what he's owed, but not all of it, and then arrange like an early release, maybe he'll take that. And after he didn't get a loan on deadline day, I think that's probably became the best course of action for all parties. It was the first time where like the interests of West Ham and the interests of Winston Reid coming back from injury kind of aligned in the middle there, and they were able to figure something out. So yeah, that's what has happened. Is he was released, and now released presumably with a large check in his pocket, and he can use that to fund presumably what will be a much, he won't be getting anywhere near the money he was getting at West Ham anywhere else, but like he doesn't need it because he's still got most of that money from West Ham that he would have been getting. Nice big payout will probably help him fund his next drop in I don't know, wages wherever else he goes. It's very like that is a very good thing for Winston Reid because of the injuries over the last 2.5 years or whatever. Like he sort of needs to be able to that's a red flag for a lot of teams. I'll put it that way. Like his injury history is a red flag for a lot of teams. If you're expecting to play something close to Premier League wages, he's just not going to get a job anywhere. If you can come in cheaply and say, well, I just got a nice payout, so I'll pay on a nice, club-friendly salary, and we'll see like maybe a per game thing if I can prove my fitness or whatever. Like, let me at it. That's the situation he's in now, which means that he is like, open pastures to explore. He can really go out there, and he's not having to worry about arranging a loan where West Ham have to be involved and their interests are a part of it. Like it's purely just now find the best footballing situation for him, and enjoy the rest of his career. It seems like a pretty good thing for him to be in this position right now.
When you're talking a lot about the contract stuff, I was thinking about Steven Adams and how like Steven Adams's contract determines how he's viewed.
Yeah.
And so Winston Reid's contract determined how he was viewed. There's just not quite the injury history of Steven Adams, although he was a bit injured last season. That has me thinking like what's going to happen, not to get into the specifics of Steven Adams' NBA contract, but in those latter years, how does he wiggle out of that, or how does the team wiggle out of that? Like, just I can see in a situation where Steven Adams becomes the tradable, like as much as we want him to be a Memphis Grizzlies hero, I think he can also move into that trader guy who just gets traded around because his salary is locked in. And he gets into that bit of a Winston Reid territory where he's just moving around not because of anything he's doing, maybe injuries are playing a part, but because of his contract. And it's like, same thing in the NRL. If you get $1 million contract, well, that's a recipe for disaster, like kind of at some point. So I'm just curious how that plays out with Steven Adams. But where do you have like any hunches on where Reid might go moving forward? Hopefully he's still a key figure in the All Whites when they do play football games as well. So Aotearoa still has that connection to him. Are we talking Wellington Phoenix? Are we talking MLS? Are we talking, England second division? What are we talking with Winston Reid's future?
Yeah, my suspicion would be championship football. I think it's where he most recently played for Brentford when they were trying to get promoted. And I think he played pretty well there as well. So I suspect there will be plenty of teams who, there's at least a dozen teams who came up against him head to head last season. I think there'd be plenty others who have scouted and checked and seen, well, he can hold his own at this level. It's, if he misses a few games through injury here or there, it's not the end of the world because we're not, second tier. We're not struggling to lose that. Like, we're not up against relegation to lose all that Premier League money kind of thing, like a lower Premier League team would be, where they just can't take that risk because it's too expensive to get relegated. You can't. You always see them playing it safe when it comes to those kind of things once they get in trouble, which is kept Winston Reid's old mate Sam Allardyce in many a job, or gotten him many a job rather, is just like, can you come in, tighten up the back line and help us avoid relegation? So I can't see him getting another Premier League gig right now. But I think he could, I think championship is a good level for him competitively and a good level for him in terms of like clubs being interested in his services. I think it's also because his family's based in London, it's a good level for him personally if he can stick around, ideally with another one of those like London championship clubs as well. There's plenty of those going around. That like he did have a stint in the MLS already on loan. That's always an option for him. He could go there. I did laugh when I was looking up Winston Reid stuff just on Twitter to see if there were any rumors flying around, and there was someone like a Sporting Kansas City beat writer saying something along the lines of, "Hey, our old mate Winston Reid has been released. What do you reckon?" But he would certainly be welcome back around Sporting Kansas City right about now, but I just don't think he'd be a starting level player. I'm like, bro, he's been released by West Ham. He's starting for Sporting Kansas City if he rocks up. I don't care how well you guys have been going. I don't see that happening though, because I think it was quite difficult for him because he was there during the height of the pandemic. He went there just before that, all the lockdowns started and everything, and he left his family behind in London to do that. So I think maybe that's, and like there was an interview with him on The Athletic not that long ago. While he was at Brentford, there was like a profile on him, and he was saying like he wants his kids are a little bit older now. He wants them to be able to see him play football. He's been out of the game for so long, it made him sort of appreciate it all a little bit more. And because his kids did get to the age where they're a little more remembering things now, he wants them to have some memories of him as a footballer. So that's probably not going to happen if he's playing in MLS. Probably not going to happen if he's playing for the Phoenix as well. I don't know that the Phoenix is really an option for a variety of reasons.
But what's
the one good reason I can think of is when Paul Eiffel signed with the Phoenix, he was coming from a championship level, and he said specifically, I'd had a lot of injuries. I wanted to play in a league where there weren't so many games. You weren't playing Sunday, Wednesday, or whatever. There was more recovery time, and he reckons that extended his career, and he obviously loved it so much he stayed. But Winston Reid, despite being a Kiwi dude, he's he lived in Denmark from the time he was 12 or something like that, and he's very much based in London at this stage. I don't necessarily think he's a guy who's going to come and retire and come back to New Zealand to live. So I don't know that the Phoenix have that allure for him. And also, I just don't know it's the best time to be playing in the A-League, especially for the Phoenix, where you'd have to be living in Australia anyway under relatively strict lockdown protocols. So I'm thinking championship, but the one smoky I'll chuck up there, which I did mention as well in the Patreon podcast, is a return to Denmark would be pretty cool. I don't know if it'll happen, but there's definitely the potential of an alignment happening there. If Marko Stamenic goes back to FC Copenhagen after a successful loan and he sort of establishes himself there and gets a few more games, and if Callum McCow, Eli Just, presumably Dalton Wilkins, if he's back there by then, if they get promoted and then they're playing in the Danish Superliga as well, and then Winston Reid goes back to Midtjylland or something like that, that would be pretty cool. And I think that's there's a bit of sentimentality there maybe as well. Reid's not really the most sentimental type, but I could see how he would appreciate that. It's been a culture in football. Ronaldo's gone back to Manchester United at the moment recently. So there's a precedent. If he can do it, then Winston Reid can. I think a championship level club is probably the best bet though.
I like the Aotearoa Sport, more recovery time. That's a fantastic summary of how we deal. We are the best sporting nation in the world, but also more recovery time. That's what we do. It's just recovery time. We're not the Premier League trying to charge through fucking Christmas, football. It's recovery time.
Premier League's about the only league in Europe that still does that. Pretty much, they have started having there's a week off or something in early January, 1 week. But most European teams, and a lot of it's determined by weather, that's the middle of winter, so January is just too difficult to play for some places. But most of them, the Bundesliga, do it. Definitely all those Scandinavian leagues and anyone to the east of that is doing it as well. As they have a full-on month off in January. They just have a winter break. Probably there's Spain and Portugal and some of the sunnier side of Europe probably don't have to, but England certainly could and definitely don't.
Well, it's Aotearoa Sport, just more recovery time. It's our slogan, yeah. More recovery time.
In fact, in Germany, ideal. Something I've picked up since Sarpreet Singh's been there. In Germany, they have, I can't remember what the German term for it is, but translated, when they play like midweek games, they call them English weeks. If you have a midweek game, it's called an English week. So Bayern Munich are playing, I don't know, I was going to say Schalke and Wolfsburg, and I keep thinking of relegated teams. I think Wolfsburg is still out there, aren't they? Bayern Munich playing RB Leipzig on a Sunday, and then they have an English week against Dortmund on Wednesday or something.
Don't want any English weeks here in New Zealand. It's just recovery.
Definitely not.
Recovery time.
Need that recovery time.
And anything else that English week might entail.